Welcome to End of Lesson Exam Review for Lesson 2, Asset Security. So this was a fairly short domain. In asset security, the topics that we covered were classifying assets. We talked about the importance of classifying assets. We looked at classification schemes, including what's used in the military, what's used in national security, and how those are applied, as well as the use of classification in the private sector. We talked about managing assets, which include inventory management and configuration management and managing assets all through their life cycle. We looked at the responsibilities of asset owners and asset custodians. We then looked at protecting data privacy. We defined privacy. We looked at the OECD principles. We talked about how that applies to European Union regulations and what we should be putting in our policies and in our privacy statements. We then looked at retention and destruction, including archiving. We also looked at the Federal Rules of Civil Procedures and appropriate policies. And then in destruction, we looked at diswiping and degaussing. And lastly, we looked at data security controls and the relationship of data security controls to classifications, and that we want to ensure that everybody understands what those classifications are, that they can apply those classifications, and that data is appropriately labeled so that we can apply the right handling standards. And we looked at various data security control guidance that's available to us, in particular looking at the NIST guidance, the NSA guidance, and the ISO guidance. All of this pertains to asset security. So you can expect some asset security questions on your exam. Because it is a relatively small domain, you'll probably have a corresponding small number of questions. But no guarantee. I have no crystal ball at all into what questions you're going to get on your exam. So let's go through a couple of questions together, and we're going to talk about both what the answers are, but as importantly, what your approaches are to answering the question. So our first question is, the FIPS 199 format for expressing a security category for an information asset is, and we're given 3 different expressions. So in a case like this, you might say, oh gosh, I don't remember what it actually is. But what you should remember is that the security categories are based on the CIA triad, so it's based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that the security category is based on impact. So it's confidentiality, integrity, availability, and what we're concerned with is impact. So if we look at our first choice, it's giving us confidentiality and impact. Okay, that works. But then it gives us privacy and impact. And while privacy is certainly important, it is not part of our security objectives. Our security objectives were confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we know that that one's not going to work. We look at the next one, starts with confidentiality. Oh, also has privacy, and that doesn't work. But it also then here has AV and asset value. And our asset value is not part of our security categorization. So we get rid of both of those. We get to our next choice. We have confidentiality and impact. Good. Integrity and impact. Even better. Availability and impact. Perfect. So it looks like C is going to be our answer. But don't mark it yet. Go on to the next answer just to be sure. So we verify in the next one, confidentiality. Oh, this one has asset value. No, that's going to allow us to get rid of it. So that gives us the confidence that letter C is the correct answer. So here's an example of, you might not remember the exact format, but you should always remember that when we're talking about security, we're always talking about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that privacy really is a very separate category. And more often than not, we're going to be talking about impact or likelihood. Let's go to question 2. Which of the following roles is responsible for implementing security mechanisms and reporting suspected incidents? Now, what I often do when I'm approaching these questions is I formulate the answer in my head and see if that's going to be one of the answers. So if I'm thinking about which role is responsible for implementing security mechanisms and reporting suspected incidents, it should be, well, you should be thinking custodian. That's who's responsible for implementing security mechanisms and reporting suspected incidents. Then we're going to look at our answers. Hopefully, what you know will be in that list. But if it's not, we're going to need to evaluate the other options to see which comes closest. So our choices were an asset user, an asset custodian, an asset manager, or an asset owner. Now, you had already determined that it's actually an asset custodian, and fortunately, we've got that answer right there. Let's talk about what the other answers have. The asset user, well, certainly an asset user is responsible for reporting suspected incidents, and they are responsible for following security mechanisms, but they're not generally the ones that are going to implement a security mechanism. An asset manager, that's just a throwaway. Our roles are going to be users, custodians, owners. Sometimes you'll just see these other terms in there, really just to trip you up. And then an asset owner is not responsible for implementing security mechanisms. They are responsible for classifying their assets, and they are responsible for the oversight to ensure that the appropriate security mechanisms have been implemented and that they appropriately respond to any suspected incidents. But it is the custodian who does the actual implementation of the mechanism. Remember that the custodian could be an individual, it could be a role, it could be a group of people, it could be a department. Question 3. So which of the following would not be considered MPPI? There's the word not, and we need to define what MPPI is. We said MPPI was non-public personal information. A social security number, an organization's tax ID number, a driver's license number, or an ATM PIN. So there's a lot of things that may be considered MPPI, and certainly you're not expected to know every element that might be MPPI. But what you should know, whether we call it MPPI or PI or PII, is that the word personal shows up in every one of those. Personal relates to an individual. So individuals have social security numbers. That would be considered MPPI. Individuals have driver's license. That would be MPPI. An ATM PIN, well, in most cases, a PIN or a password belongs to an individual. So that would be MPPI. But an organization's tax ID number does not belong to an individual. It belongs to an organization. And so it is not personal or not personally identifiable, so that would be outside of the realm of NPPI. So this one might be a little bit of a challenge because right away you'd say, okay, social security number and driver's license number, definitely, those are MPPI. And you may hedge on the ATM PIN. And when you come down between two answers, perhaps the ATM PIN and the organization's tax ID, what you want to do is you're going to figure out how to choose the better between those two. So eliminate the ones you know right away, and then start thinking through the others. And an ATM PIN, again, is usually to a user or an organization. They're giving us the word right there, organization. That lets us know that it's not specific to an individual. And the P in MPPI, right, is personal. Question 4. This is really just a pure definition on this one. The process of exposing a magnetic object to a magnetic field of greater fluctuating intensity is known as, now you should do this one in your head, you should know that this one is degaussing. So let's see if we get that answer. Well, our choices are degaussing, great, it's there, but we always look through the other ones. Remanence, well, you should be able to define in your head that remanence is what's left over, sort of the residual of a file, even after it's been deleted. Wiping is when we use the disk wiping. That's the overwriting of the drive, including the master boot record, multiple times, and then formatting. And deleting doesn't really get rid of a file. The only thing deleting does is it gets rid of the pointer to that file. You already knew that the answer was degaussing. Degaussing is answer A. Choose it and move on. And lastly, question 5. A data state is best described as at rest, in transit, in use, in point in time. Now this is one of those questions where it feels like all the answers are right. A data state could be at rest. A data state could be in transit. A data state could be in use. All of those are different types of states. But a state means a point in time. So at a specific point in time, what state is the data in? So in a hierarchy, point in time is going to be really the top answer, and then all of those, A, B, C, could all be types of data state, but it is not the description of a data state. So our answer here is going to be D, point in time. So thank you for joining me for this exam review. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move into the next domain, and we're going to move into lesson 3.